For half a year, my wife was writing her lover all day long. But she said to me that she was working 9 to 5 in the bank. Be me, Archer. Wasn't expecting her to enter my life. Relationships weren't something I actively sought out. Too intense with career and personal ambitions. Life doesn't always follow carefully constructed plans. She walked into my world. Everything I thought I knew about control and discipline, suddenly irrelevant. First saw her at a social gathering. One of those events attended more out of obligation than desire. Networking event to connect with other successful people. Exchange pleasantries, maybe forge useful alliances. Always been somewhat detached at these gatherings. Prefer my own company. Mingling isn't exactly my strong suit. Then, she caught my eye. That moment when my gaze found hers across the room. Beginning of something that would change course of my life. Something about her drew me in. Couldn't fully process what was happening. Wasn't just her beauty, though that was undeniable. The way she moved through crowd with ease. Her smile like she knew a secret no one else was privy to. Confidence about her, a presence that captivated me instantly. Feeling I hadn't experienced before surged through me. Strange mix of excitement and fear. For a man always in control. This sudden rush of emotions unsettling. Wasn't used to being vulnerable. Idea of approaching her filled me with hesitation. What would I even say? For all my success and achievements, suddenly felt like most uncertain person in room. Could command a boardroom. But here, in this personal moment, paralyzed by fear of rejection, found myself lingering at edges of gathering, stealing glances at her, unsure how to bridge the gap. What if she wasn't interested? What if I made a fool of myself? These thoughts ran through my mind, chipping away at confidence I'd spent years building in other areas of life. Something magnetic about her. Wouldn't let me walk away. Found myself moving toward her. Every instinct told me to stay put, avoid the risk. Air seemed to shift around me as I approached, mixture of nervousness and anticipation swirling in my chest. Finally close enough, hesitated for just a moment longer. Wondered if this was a mistake. Mind calmed just enough to introduce myself. Words felt strange coming out of my mouth, used to making powerful statements in business settings. Here, found myself fumbling for something casual. Something that wouldn't make me seem too intense. She responded with warmth that caught me off guard. For a brief moment, tension I'd been feeling evaporated. She was easy to talk to. Much easier than expected. Conversation flowed. Realized how quickly I was getting lost in her stories. The way she laughed. The way her eyes seemed to light up when she spoke about her passions. Fear that initially gripped me slowly melted away, replaced by something much more comfortable. Found myself intrigued by her. Wanted to know more about who she was, what she cared about, what made her tick. Lightness to the conversation. Ease that I rarely felt with others. Didn't feel forced or rehearsed. Before long, event around us faded into background. Just the two of us. In that moment, nothing else seemed to matter. For someone who built life around structure and control, this experience unlike anything I'd ever known. Wasn't planning every step. Wasn't thinking 3 moves ahead. Simply present, engaged in the moment. Letting myself be swept up in connection forming between us. As night went on, dreaded moment when it would end. When I'd have to return to carefully constructed life. For now, allowed myself to enjoy it. Indulge in feeling of being truly interested in someone beyond surface level. Always thought relationships were a distraction, something that could pull me away from my goals. Standing there, talking to her, realized maybe I had been wrong. Vulnerability in way I approached this budding connection. Something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Exhilarating, stepping into unfamiliar territory. Calculated, methodical part of me wanted to retreat. Protect myself from unknown, part of me longing for something more. Something beyond success and ambition. Pushing me forward, encouraging me to see where this might lead. Despite uncertainty, despite unfamiliarity of it all, let myself be drawn into her world. Opened a door I had long kept shut. Beginning of something new, something exciting. For first time in long, allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than pursuit of success. This encounter was first crack in walls I had built around myself. Moment when everything started to shift, even if I didn't fully realize it at time. All I knew then was that she had left a mark on me. A mark that would soon begin to change everything I thought I knew. About myself and life I was living. Changes in Maris's behavior weren't sudden. Gradual, almost imperceptible at first. Looking back now, can pinpoint exact moments. Those tiny shifts that should have raised alarm bells. At the time, convinced myself it was nothing. Things had been going well between us. Didn't want to jeopardize that with unfounded doubts. Remember when it first began? Maris started becoming more distant. Couldn't put my finger on why. Wasn't anything overt, just a subtle pulling away. Warmth that used to fill our conversations diminished. Once, frequent laughter we shared became less and less. We'd always been able to talk about anything, share thoughts and feelings openly. now felt like there was a wall between us, a wall I didn't know how to tear down. It began with her phone. Noticed she started being more secretive with it, always turning it away when I was nearby, keeping it out of reach. When she'd get messages, she'd smile or laugh quietly. When I asked what it was about, her answers were vague, dismissive. Just a friend, she'd say, brushing it off as if it were nothing. Wanted to believe her. And at first I did. But doubt began creeping in. Started questioning things. Small things. Why the sudden secrecy? Why the need to hide messages? Told myself not to overreact. Everyone deserved their privacy, right? Just because she wasn't sharing every detail didn't mean something was wrong. Still, the gnawing feeling inside me grew stronger, especially as these behaviors became more pronounced. She began spending more time out with her friends, particularly one group she had met through work. She'd be out late, later than usual. When she'd come home, she seemed distracted, lost in thoughts she wouldn't share with me. Wasn't just the phone or the late nights. It was her demeanor, how she'd grown distant, not only emotionally but physically as well. Easy intimacy we once shared had started to fade. She was still affectionate, but it felt more like an obligation, like she was going through the motions rather than truly being present with me. The change was subtle but noticeable enough. Began to eat away at my peace of mind. Started asking questions, gently at first, trying not to sound accusatory. Is everything okay? I'd ask. You've seemed a little distant lately. She'd always have an answer, always something that seemed plausible. Work had been stressful, she'd say, or she was just tired. For a while, I accepted these explanations, wanted to trust her, didn't want to believe that there was anything more going on. But the doubt wouldn't go away, lingered in the back of my mind, growing louder with every passing day. Tried to dispel it by reminding myself of all the good times we'd shared, all the reasons I loved her and trusted her. Told myself I was being paranoid, that my insecurities were getting the better of me. After all, wasn't it natural for relationships to go through ebbs and flows? Perhaps this was just a rough patch, something we could work through together. Began making more of an effort to reconnect with her, to reignite the spark that had once defined our relationship. Planned date nights, surprised her with thoughtful gestures, tried to engage her in meaningful conversations. But despite my efforts, the distance remained. She seemed appreciative but not fully engaged, as if her mind was elsewhere. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to reach her. Even convinced myself to ignore a growing number of small inconsistencies. The missed calls, the excuses that didn't quite add up. Times when she'd mention one plan, but later tell a slightly different story. I didn't want to be that person. The one who overanalyzes everything, who becomes consumed by suspicion. So I pushed those thoughts aside, hoping that with enough patience and love, things would return to how they were. Deep down, I knew something was wrong. The signs were there. As much as I wanted to ignore them, they were becoming impossible to deny. Found myself replaying moments in my mind, trying to decipher her words, her actions, searching for any clue that might explain what was happening. The more I thought about it, the more it consumed me. There were times when I considered confronting her, laying all my concerns on the table, but every time I hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if I was just being paranoid? Didn't want to accuse her of something without proof. Didn't want to damage the relationship by letting my doubts run wild. So instead, I tried to push the thoughts away, hoping that they were just a product of my overactive imagination. Still, the doubts lingered, creeping into my thoughts at the most unexpected times. Began noticing more changes. The way she'd avoid eye contact when I asked about her day. Increasing number of work trips that seemed to come out of nowhere. Friends I'd never heard of until recently. The more I tried to dismiss my suspicions, the stronger they became, until they were impossible to ignore. At one point, even confided in a close friend, hoping for some reassurance, laid out the situation, explained the changes in her behavior, the doubts that had been gnawing at me. They told me what I wanted to hear, that I was probably overthinking things, that relationships go through phases, that it was important to trust your partner. But even their reassurances couldn't quiet the voice in my head, telling me that something wasn't right. Despite my attempts to bury the doubt, it was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when it would all come crashing down. Tried to ignore it, to keep moving forward as if everything was fine. But in my heart, I knew that the foundation of our relationship was beginning to crack. The uncertainty was unbearable. Found myself caught between wanting to confront her and not wanting to face the possibility that my worst fears might be true. So I lived in limbo, constantly questioning her actions, her words, her motives, but never daring to cross the line into full-blown accusations. The trust that had once been the cornerstone of our relationship was eroding. No matter how hard I tried to hold on to it, it slipped further and further away. Looking back, I can see how all the signs were there, how my attempts to dispel my suspicions were in vain. But in the moment, I was simply trying to protect what we had built, to hold on to the belief that everything could still be okay. Didn't want to admit to myself that things had changed, that the woman I had once known so well was now a stranger, hiding secrets I couldn't yet fathom. Be me, Archer? Never wanted to believe it would come to this. Idea of betrayal always seemed distant, something that happened to other people, in other relationships, not mine. As evidence began to pile up, piece by piece, no more room for denial. Remember exact moment when everything became clear. Gut-wrenching realization that my suspicions were not just figments of imagination. They were real, had been right in front of me all along. Started with a slip, one of those unplanned moments. Something said, something seen that could no longer be explained away. Had gone through Maris's phone once before. Decision that filled me with shame. In desperation for answers, did it again. Hadn't wanted to resort to it. Part of me needed confirmation. Needed the truth, even if it would shatter everything I thought I knew. Messages were there, clear as day. Undeniable in their content. Maris had been talking to someone else. Not just talking, something more. Messages between them were intimate, affectionate. Cut me deeper than I expected. Could feel cold weight settle in my chest as I read through them. Feeling lines of my reality blur as truth I feared became clear. Hands trembled as I scrolled through the thread, unable to stop myself from reading more. Seeking out every damning detail. Each message was a blow, knocking the wind out of me. Realized just how deeply she had betrayed me. Words were like a knife, twisting in a wound. Didn't even know had been there. All this time while I was trying to reconnect, while I was fighting for the relationship, she had been building something else with someone else. No excuses left, no plausible explanations. To ease the sting of what I was seeing. More I read, more I felt my world unravel. It wasn't just physical, though. That would have been devastating enough. It was the emotional intimacy, the connection they shared. She had confided in this person, shared her thoughts and feelings, in ways she hadn't with me for months. Worst part was how normal she had seemed, how effortlessly she had carried on with me. While doing this behind my back, all those nights when she had been busy, trips she had taken with her friends, now I could see them for what they truly were. Could see the lies she had woven so skillfully, so casually, that I had never thought to question them until now. Remember, feeling strange, numbness at first. Too much to process all at once. Weight of it too heavy to fully bear in that moment. Mind raced, trying to piece together the timeline. Trying to understand how long this had been going on. How deep it went. Wanted answers, but at the same time, wasn't sure if I could handle them. Wasn't sure if I was ready to face full scope of her betrayal. As shock wore off, numbness replaced by anger. Anger so fierce it nearly consumed me. How could she do this? How could she betray me so easily, so casually? After everything we had been through together, I had trusted her. We had built a life together, shared dreams and plans for the future. Now all of that seemed like a lie. Everything I thought I knew about our relationship felt false, tainted by knowledge of what she had been doing behind my back. Felt humiliated, like a fool for not seeing it sooner. All those little signs, those moments of doubt, I had brushed them aside, convinced myself they didn't mean anything. But now I could see them for what they were. Cracks in foundation of our relationship. Cracks that had been growing for far longer than I had realized. Betrayal felt personal, like violation of everything I held sacred. I had given her my trust, my loyalty. She had thrown it away for someone else. Pain of that realization was almost unbearable. It wasn't just act of cheating. It was the deceit, the way she had carried on as if nothing was wrong, as if I was still the person she loved and cared for. Replayed all the moments in my mind, over and over again. Nights we spent together, times we laughed, intimate conversations we shared. How much of it had been real? How much of it had been a facade? A mask she wore while her mind and her heart were elsewhere? First reaction, after initial shock and anger, was confusion. Why? Kept asking myself that question, trying to make sense of it all. What had gone wrong? What had driven her to this? I had always been there for her, supported her, loved her. What had changed? Searched for answers, trying to find some explanation. That would make the pain more bearable. That would help me understand how woman I loved could do this to me. But no explanation could ease sting of betrayal. No reasoning could undo damage that had been done. Trust that had once been cornerstone of our relationship was gone, shattered into million pieces. Wasn't sure could ever be put back together. Tried to hold it together. Tried to maintain some semblance of control as I processed the betrayal. But it was impossible. Emotions came in waves. Anger, sadness, confusion, disbelief. Each one crashing over me with relentless force. Felt like I was drowning in them. Unable to find solid ground. Unable to make sense of chaos that had suddenly overtaken my life. In that moment, as I sat there, with evidence of her betrayal in front of me, felt utterly lost. Woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone who had lied to me, who had betrayed my trust in most intimate way possible. In her place was harsh reality of what our relationship had become. Hollow shell, filled with secrets and lies. Looking back now, I can see that this was moment when everything changed. There was no going back. No undoing what had been done. Betrayal had been exposed. No way to put that knowledge back in box. I could no longer live in blissful ignorance of not knowing. Now I had to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. My world had been turned upside down. Nothing would ever be the same again. Be me, Archer. Confrontation was inevitable. Tried to prepare myself. Rehearsing conversation in my mind over and over again. How do you confront person you love? One you've shared everything with. When you know they've betrayed you? How do you ask questions you already know answers to? Hoping against hope that maybe there's some explanation. Some reason that can make all of this make sense? No turning back. Couldn't live with weight of betrayal without addressing it. Evidence was clear. Messages and subtle lies had unraveled her story. Time to confront Maris no matter how much it terrified me. Had to hear her side, face truth head on. Even if it meant tearing apart life we had built together. Moment came on quiet evening. Maris sitting across from me, unaware of what I was about to say. Nervous tension in air, one I hadn't noticed before but now felt suffocating. Began slowly, almost cautiously, as if testing waters, asked her about her trip, about recent changes in her behavior. She responded with same casual ease she always had. Now it felt forced, like she was trying too hard to maintain lie about to unravel. When I mentioned messages, everything changed. Her expression shifted. Surprise at first, followed by flicker of fear. She knew. She knew I had found out. For a brief moment, silent acknowledgement between us. Walls she had carefully built around our secret were crumbling. No more pretending. She tried to deny it at first, of course. Said it wasn't what it looked like. That I was overreacting, that I'd misunderstood. But her voice wavered. Confidence that had once defined her replaced by uncertainty. Could see it in her eyes. She knew she was caught. Even as she tried to deflect, I pushed forward. Demanding answers, demanding truth. Conversation quickly spiraled into something raw and painful. Each word cutting deeper than last. Felt surge of anger as she continued to lie. Continued to evade responsibility for what she had done. She offered excuses. She was lonely. Things hadn't been same between us for a while. It wasn't serious, it didn't mean anything. But each excuse felt like salt and wound, only making betrayal worse. How could she justify this? How could she try to downplay something that had destroyed foundation of our relationship? As I pressed her for more, she finally admitted truth. She had been seeing someone else. Started casually, she claimed. Something she hadn't intended to go as far as it did. She didn't know how to stop it. Didn't know how to tell me without losing everything. Her words were a mix of regret and selfishness. Though she apologized, it felt hollow. Could hear guilt in her voice. But it was overshadowed by her attempts to defend her actions, to make it seem like she had been pushed to this point. There was anger in her too. Frustration that confrontation was happening at all. She said I had been distant, that she felt neglected. Accused me of not being there for her emotionally, of focusing too much on work, on my goals, not enough on relationship. It was twisted narrative, one that tried to shift blame onto me, as if her betrayal was somehow my fault. Felt surge of disbelief. How could she turn this around on me? I had been working so hard, trying to build future for both of us, sacrificing my time and energy to provide life where we could both thrive. Yes, things had been tough. Yes, I had been focused on my career, but that didn't justify what she had done. There were other ways to address problems, to fix what was broken, without resorting to infidelity. Yet here she was, trying to rationalize her actions, as though they were a result of my shortcomings. Arguments flew back and forth, both of us saying things that couldn't be unsaid. Air was thick with resentment. Love we once shared buried beneath layers of hurt and betrayal. Told her how much she had hurt me, how shattered I felt by her actions. Told her about nights I spent agonizing over what had gone wrong, trying to figure out how to make things better, only to realize that she had been tearing it all apart behind my back. She cried, of course, apologized again, over and over, saying she never wanted to hurt me, claimed she still loved me, that she wanted to fix things, that she wasn't ready to give up on relationship. But by then, damage was done. Her tears, her apologies, they couldn't erase what had happened, couldn't undo betrayal, lies, pain I was now left to deal with. In that moment, faced with choice, could walk away, leave her in relationship behind, or could try to work through it. Try to rebuild what had been broken. But as much as part of me wanted to fix things, wanted to believe that maybe we could find our way back to each other, another part of me knew it was over. Trust was gone. Bond we had once shared was irreparably damaged. No amount of apologies or promises could bring it back. Conversation ended in silence. No more words left to say. Arguments, accusations, tears. It all felt meaningless now. Stood there, staring at woman who had once been my everything. Realized that she was stranger to me now. Person I had loved. Future I had envisioned together. Had all been destroyed by her choices. She asked if I could ever forgive her. If there was any way to move past this. But I couldn't answer. Pain was too fresh, betrayal too deep. Forgiveness felt impossible. Something that couldn't be granted in midst of chaos that now defined our relationship. Maybe one day, in distant future, I could find it in myself to forgive her. But right now, all I could feel was weight of her betrayal and emptiness it left behind. As I walked away from that conversation, knew that things would never be same. Relationship, love, trust, it was all gone. All that remained was bitter taste of betrayal and long, painful road ahead of me. As I tried to figure out what to do next, I had confronted her. I had gotten truth, but it had cost me everything. Now, it was time to decide what came next. Be me, Archer, in aftermath of confrontation with Maris. Emotions consuming me were tangled. Mess of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. Woman I had trusted, one I had built my life around, had torn it all apart in one reckless, selfish act. Pain was unbearable, though I wanted nothing more than to distance myself from her and situation. Storm of emotions raging inside me demanded some form of release. Couldn't simply walk away without addressing what had happened, without holding her accountable for what she had done to me. Idea of retribution wasn't born out of desire for revenge, at least not in typical sense. No place for violence or destructive behavior in my mind. That would have made me no better than person who had betrayed me. Instead, what I sought was closure. Way to reclaim some sense of control over situation that had spiraled far beyond my grasp. Anger needed an outlet, but it had to be directed in a way that was meaningful. Way that would allow me to move forward without losing myself in process. Began by distancing myself emotionally. Though we still lived in same house, everything between Maris and me had shifted. Distance grew. Chasm between us that widened with each passing day. She tried to reach out, to bridge gap with apologies and small gestures. But I remained resolute in my silence. Every attempt she made felt hollow, like desperate scramble to patch up relationship that had long since unraveled. I didn't want her gestures. I wanted her to understand depth of damage she had caused, to truly feel consequences of her betrayal. Work became my escape. Threw myself into my career with renewed focus, using long hours as a way to avoid coming home, to avoid facing her. More I distanced myself from her. More I felt in control again. As though reclaiming my life from wreckage she had created, my success in professional life became form of quiet retribution. Proof that I didn't need her, that I could rise above situations she had put me in. It was silent, but powerful statement. I was moving forward, even as she was left behind. To deal with guilt and consequences of her actions, my interactions with her became minimal, perfunctory at best. No more heartfelt conversations. No attempts to resolve lingering tension. I refused to give her satisfaction of knowing she could still reach me on any emotional level. Detachment was my shield. Way to protect myself from further pain. My way of letting her know that she had lost any influence she once had over me. I was no longer man she could manipulate with her tears or her pleas for forgiveness. I had taken back control of my life, even if it meant severing emotional ties that had once bound us together. Though I never acted out in a way that could be considered revenge in traditional sense, there were moments when I allowed myself small, calculated acts of retribution. Made decisions about future of relationship without consulting her. Cutting her out of process entirely. There were subtle ways in which I asserted my dominance, showing her that power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. She had once been center of my world, but now, she was little more than background figure in life I was rebuilding. She noticed, of course. She saw way I had pulled away. Way I no longer sought her opinion or considered her feelings in decisions I made. She knew that power she once had over me was gone. There was visible change in her demeanor. Her once confident presence now overshadowed by guilt and uncertainty. She became quieter, more reserved, as if weight of her actions had finally begun to sink in. Subtle shift in her behavior was another form of retribution. Quiet acknowledgement that she was now living an aftermath of her own choices. But there was no satisfaction in watching her suffer. Hollow victory of seeing her realize full extent of her betrayal. Didn't bring peace I had hoped for. Instead, it only deepened sense of loss. That had been gnawing at me since day I found out. There was no true solace in making her feel consequences of her actions. It didn't undo pain, didn't erase memories of what she had done. Retribution, in end, was hollow endeavor. Something that allowed me to reclaim sense of control, but did little to heal wounds left behind. In moments of reflection, I questioned whether path I had taken had been right one. By shutting her out, by refusing to engage with her on any meaningful level. Had I missed opportunity for closure? For healing? Or was this just another step in long process of moving on? I wasn't sure. All I knew was that every attempt at retribution felt like bandage over wound. That needed far more than temporary fixes. Pain was still there, simmering beneath surface, even as I distanced myself from her and life we once shared. Yet, despite emptiness of my actions, I continued. Detachment, coldness, distance, they were my armor, kept me safe from further harm, even if they did nothing to address emotional scars that had been left behind. There were moments when I wanted to reach out, to have one final conversation with her that could bring some sense of closure, but I knew that would only open wounds again, and I wasn't ready to face that kind of vulnerability. In end, my retribution wasn't about punishing her. It was about protecting myself, about creating space where I could heal, without constant reminder of her betrayal. It was about moving forward, even if that forward motion felt slow and painful. I couldn't undo what had been done, but I could control how I reacted to it. I could take back my life, piece by piece, and rebuild it without her. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, intensity of my anger began to fade. Retribution I had sought, though it hadn't brought peace I hoped for, had at least allowed me to carve out new life for myself, one where she no longer held any power over me. It was small victory, but victory nonetheless. I had survived worst of it, and now all that remained was long road of healing ahead. Consequences of my actions weren't just hers to bear. They were mine as well, in cutting her out, in shutting her down. I had also shut down part of myself, but perhaps that was price I had to pay to move forward. Perhaps, in time, I would find a way to heal those parts of myself too. But for now, all I could do was focus on future. One step at a time, be me, Archer. As time went on, despite everything, lingering part of me wanted to believe it wasn't all in vain. Memories of better times surfaced every now and then, stirring something deep inside. Curiosity. Faint hope that maybe, just maybe, this wreckage of relationship could still be salvaged. Had to be conversation, one last attempt to understand what had gone so horribly wrong, and whether any of it could still be saved. I was conflicted. I distanced myself, but history we shared, time invested, made it impossible to fully detach. That urge to resolve things clung to me, even when logic told me it was futile. Didn't plan conversation, how could I? Wasn't something I could approach with clear head or rehearsed script. Came about one evening after days of cold silence, where weight of unspoken words grew too heavy to bear. Sitting across from Maris, tension in air was palpable. No easy way to begin. No soft entry into confrontation that loomed ahead. But I knew this had to happen. Had to face her one last time, for my own peace of mind. Started slowly. Words coming hesitantly at first. Wasn't easy to articulate everything I'd been feeling. Mix of pain, betrayal, and confusion that had haunted me since I found out about affair. Laid it all out, doubts that had first crept in. Slow realization. Crushing weight of knowing someone I trusted had betrayed me so deeply. Wasn't trying to accuse or blame her any longer, but rather, I needed to understand why it happened. What had led her to this point? Was it something I did or didn't do? Asked questions not for sake of reconciliation, but because I needed closure, some form of clarity to move forward. Maris's response was hesitant, as if she had been expecting this moment but dreading it all same. She didn't deny betrayal. There was no point in that now. Instead, she spoke about how things had changed between us. How relationship had grown distant long before affair. She said she felt neglected. That emotional connection we once had faded over time. While she admitted to her mistakes, she tried to shift some of blame to cracks in relationship, implying that affair was symptom of something that had already been broken. Hearing her say these things was like punch to gut. It hurt to think that my actions, or lack thereof, had contributed to this. But at the same time, there was part of me that felt indignant. I had worked hard, focused on my career, provided everything I thought was needed for stable, happy life. Yes, maybe I hadn't been as emotionally present, but did that justify what she had done? Excuses she gave felt like hollow justifications for betrayal that could never truly be justified. Yet, despite pain, I still found myself trying to understand her perspective. Maybe there was truth in what she was saying. Maybe we had drifted apart without realizing it. But even then, wasn't there another way to fix things? Why hadn't she come to me with her concerns instead of turning to someone else? These thoughts raced through my mind as I tried to process her explanations, trying to make sense of it all. As conversation went on, it became clear that neither of us could find common ground. I was looking for reasons and she was offering explanations, but none of it felt like enough. Found myself repeating same questions in different ways, hoping for answer that would make it all make sense. But it never came. She apologized again and again, but words rang hollow. There was no apology that could undo what had been done. Trust had been shattered, and no amount of regret on her part could rebuild it. Could see guilt in her eyes, way she shrank under weight of my questions. But there was something else there too. Resignation. She knew, just as I did, that there was no going back from this. No matter how many conversations we had, no matter how much we tried to understand each other, damage was irreparable. Affair had been breaking point. Not just for relationship, but for everything I once believed about love, trust, and partnership. At some point in conversation, I realized I wasn't trying to save relationship anymore. Last attempt wasn't about reconciliation. It was about letting go. I wasn't trying to find way to fix things. I was trying to find way to move on. Questions I asked were no longer about her actions or her reasons, but about my own future. What would life look like without her? How could I rebuild after everything that had happened? Answers didn't come easily, but they started to take shape as conversation wound down. Last attempt wasn't dramatic fight or tearful plea for forgiveness. It was quiet, painful acknowledgement that life we had built together was over. There were no raised voices, no grand declarations, just heavy silence that settled between us. Silence that spoke louder than any words ever could. We both knew in that moment that this was end. Conversation had served its purpose, even if it hadn't provided closure I was hoping for. As I sat there, weight of finality pressed down on me. Relationship that had once been so full of promise and potential had crumbled before my eyes, and there was nothing left to salvage. I had made my last attempt, but it hadn't been enough. It was time to let go, to accept that some things, once broken, could never be fixed. Walked away from that conversation feeling numb, emotional exhaustion taking its toll. But there was also a strange sense of relief, as though burden had been lifted. I had done everything I could. I had tried to understand, to find answers, to save what was left. But now, it was over, and I could finally begin to move forward. There was no more room for what-ifs or second chances. Last attempt had failed, and all that was left was to pick up pieces and figure out what came next. I had faced hardest part, confronting person I once loved and realizing that love wasn't enough to save us. Road ahead was uncertain, but at least now I knew where I stood. There was no going back, no more attempts to reconcile. Chapter of my life that included Maris was closing. As painful as it was, there was also a sense of finality. That allowed me to take my first steps toward healing. Be me, Archer? When decision was made to end marriage, it felt surreal. Life I had spent years building together with Maurice now required legal dismantling. Cold, bureaucratic process that stripped emotion from something that had once been full of passion and love. Knew it was necessary, but that didn't make it any easier. Walking into divorce process was like entering maze I hadn't prepared for. Each turn revealed new complexities I wasn't sure how to navigate. Divorce wasn't just end of relationship. It was end of an identity, of being part of something bigger than myself. Had grown used to being husband, a partner. Now had to figure out who I was without her, without roles and routines that had defined my days. Initial steps were painfully formal. Meetings with lawyers, discussions about finances, assets, and possessions. That once felt shared now seemed coldly transactional. Wasn't prepared for how mechanical it would feel. How dissolution of my marriage could be boiled down to paperwork and signatures. First difficulty was paperwork itself. Filling out forms that reduced our relationship to legal jargon was jarring. Terms like irreconcilable differences felt like understatement for what we had been through. It wasn't just about breakdown of communication. It was about betrayal, loss, and shattered trust. But law didn't care about those nuances. It cared about dividing assets, assigning blame in a way that fit into predefined categories, also forced to confront my emotions in more tangible way than ever before. As I reviewed details of life we had shared, joint accounts, shared property, even mundane things like household items, each decision on who got what reopened old wounds. Every conversation about who would keep house, furniture, or even car felt like extension of conflict that had ended our relationship. These weren't just things. They were symbols of life we had built together. Dividing them was like tearing down structure brick by brick, leaving nothing but empty shell behind. But material aspects of divorce, while difficult, weren't hardest part. Real challenge lay in emotional toll it took on me. Each meeting with lawyers, each email exchanged about terms and conditions, reminded me of failure of relationship. It was exhausting, ongoing reminder that person I had once loved was now someone I had to negotiate with. There was no love left to ease process, only shared determination to get through it as quickly and painlessly as possible. Worst of it, though, was realization that divorce wasn't clean break. Wasn't as simple as signing document and walking away. There were still loose ends, lingering conversations, and emotional residue that clung to me long after legal process was complete. Even once papers were signed and we were officially divorced, there was emptiness that couldn't be filled by finality of court decision. I was free from marriage, but not from pain, doubts, or sense of loss that came with it. Divorce proceedings required constant communication with Marcy. That alone was its own form of emotional exhaustion. Every interaction was a reminder of what had gone wrong, of trust that had been broken. There were no fights, no dramatic confrontations during process, but there was lingering tension. Unspoken recognition that this was not how things were supposed to end. Person who had once shared my bed, my dreams, and my future was now on opposite side of legal battle, even if it was a relatively amicable one. And that was its own form of heartbreak. As I went through motions of divorce, couldn't help but think about what future would hold. There were moments when I doubted my decision, wondering if relationship could have been saved if I had done something differently, if I had tried harder. But those thoughts were fleeting. Deep down, I knew that marriage had been irreparably damaged. Even if we had stayed together, trust would never have been restored. Betrayal had left a scar that no amount of reconciliation could heal. Future was blurred during those weeks. I was so consumed by process of ending marriage that it was hard to imagine what life would look like after it was all over. There was fear, of course. Fear of being alone. Fear of starting over. Fear of never finding someone who would love me way I once thought she had. But there was also a strange sense of anticipation, as though this painful process was leading me towards something new. Even if I couldn't yet see what that was, there were also unexpected moments of relief. As the legal process came to end, I felt lighter, as though weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Relationship had been dragging me down for so long, clouding my mind and my emotions. That finality of divorce brought kind of freedom. It wasn't freedom I had wanted or anticipated, but it was freedom nonetheless. I no longer had to live in shadow of betrayal or constant tension that had characterized final months of my marriage. When divorce was finalized, it was both a moment of sadness and relief. I was officially no longer husband, no longer bound to a woman who had betrayed me, but also no longer connected to life we had built together. It was ending, but it was also beginning. One that felt daunting and uncertain but necessary. Months that followed divorce were time of adjustment. Had to relearn how to live alone, how to navigate life that was no longer shared with someone else. There were moments of deep loneliness, times when I questioned whether I had made right choice. But there were also moments of clarity. Began to see that relationship had been holding me back. That betrayal had been turning point, not just in my marriage but in my life. Looking ahead, I didn't have all answers, but I had something I hadn't had in a long time. Hope that I could rebuild, that I could find happiness again, that this painful chapter of my life would eventually lead to something better. Divorce had been difficult, more difficult than I could have imagined, but it had also given me a chance to start over. And in that starting over, there was possibility I hadn't seen in a long time. Future, once shrouded in doubt and uncertainty, slowly started to take shape. Began to see it not as bleak landscape, but as open road, full of potential. Divorce hadn't broken me. It had forced me to confront truth about my marriage, about myself, and about what I wanted from life. And in doing so, it had given me second chance, not to rewrite past, but to shape future in a way that was truly my own. Be me, Archer. Emerging from shadow of divorce, found myself at crossroads. Point where past intersected with promise of new beginning. Aftermath of dissolution of my marriage had left me feeling raw and vulnerable. But it also opened doors to opportunities I hadn't considered before. As I stepped into this new life, journey was both challenging and exhilarating, filled with moments of reflection and growth. In early days after divorce, emptiness felt palpable. Silence in my home was deafening, each room reminder of life that once thrived within those walls. Spent hours wandering through familiar spaces, grappling with memories of laughter, love, and betrayal. Yet, as time passed, began to redefine what home meant for me. Slowly transformed space into sanctuary. Reflection of my identity, my interests, and my newfound freedom. Started small, changing decor to match my current mindset. Vibrant colors replaced muted tones that had once dominated rooms. Photographs of happy moments were swapped out for images that inspired me. Landscapes, art, and quotes that resonated with my aspirations. Was gradual process, but with each change, felt little lighter, little more like myself. Rebuilding my life after divorce also meant reassessing my goals and ambitions. Clarity that followed emotional chaos led me to reflect on what I truly wanted. Had always been driven, focused on my career. But now I wanted more than just professional success. Craved personal fulfillment, adventures, and experiences that would enrich my life. Decided it was time to invest in myself, to prioritize my happiness. Enrolled in classes that had long intrigued me, diving into subjects that had once been sidelined by demands of marriage. From cooking to photography, discovered new passions that awakened a sense of curiosity within me. Each class was exploration, way to reconnect with myself, to remind myself of joys of learning and growing. Laughter of new friends and thrill of acquiring new skills injected vitality into my days. Socializing became a crucial part of this transition. Initially, stepping out into a world alone felt daunting. Feared judgment of others, questions that might arise about my divorce. But as I began to meet new people, through classes, workshops, and community events, discovered supportive network of individuals who were eager to share their own stories of growth and change. Conversations flowed, and with each interaction, felt weight of isolation lift. I was not alone. Others had faced their own struggles and emerged stronger. Dating, too, became part of this new chapter, though it was approached with caution. Fear of vulnerability lingered, residue from pain of betrayal. Was hesitant to let anyone in, worried that history might repeat itself. However, as I met new people, slowly learned to open my heart again. Each date was tentative step, chance to explore connections without pressures of serious commitment. Found joy and excitement of getting to know someone new, sharing experiences and discovering mutual interests. In time, met Adeline, who sparked my interest in a way that felt different from before. There was no rush, no urgency, just pleasure of shared moments and laughter. This new relationship was built on foundation of trust, open communication, and mutual respect. Elements that had been sorely lacking in my previous marriage. As I navigated this budding connection, discovered importance of setting boundaries and prioritizing my own needs. Had learned hard way how essential it was to protect my heart, to ensure that any future relationship was built on healthier dynamic. Healing process was not linear. There were days when shadows of past would creep back in, moments when I would remember pain, disappointment, and sense of loss. But each time those feelings arose, faced them with newfound resilience, had endured heartache and emerged on other side. Had strength to keep moving forward. Journaling became an essential tool during this time, allowing me to process my emotions and reflect on my journey. Filled pages with my thoughts, fears, and aspirations, documenting both highs and lows of this transformative period. As I embraced this new life, began to set goals that aligned with my desires and values. Dreamed of traveling, of exploring places that had long been on my bucket list. Envisioned adventures that would challenge me and allow me to experience world in ways that had once felt impossible. With each passing month, planned trips, both big and small, giving myself permission to break free from routine that had once confined me. Learn to savor moments, to find joy in little things, to appreciate freedom that came with living life on my own terms. With each step forward, recognize that pain of my past had shaped me, but it didn't define me. Experiences of betrayal and heartbreak had taught me valuable lessons about love, trust, and importance of self-worth. Had emerged from wreckage of my marriage not as victim, but as survivor. Person who had faced adversity and chosen to rebuild. Concept of home evolved once more as I ventured into this new chapter. No longer just physical space. It became feeling, sense of belonging within myself. Learned to appreciate solitude, to find peace in my own company. Filled my life with things that brought me joy. Books, hobbies, and friendships that enriched my days. My identity expanded, no longer tied to roles I had played in past. Was becoming who I was always meant to be. Future, once clouded with uncertainty, was now bright with possibilities. Had embraced change, navigated complexities of loss, emerged with renewed sense of purpose. As I continued to explore new horizons, felt sense of excitement bubbling within me. Belief that best was yet to come. Through all challenges, had learned to trust myself again. Understood that relationships, whether romantic or platonic, would come and go. But most important relationship was one I had with myself. With that knowledge, moved forward with hope, embracing each day as opportunity to create life filled with joy, passion, and fulfillment. As I stepped into future, carried with me lessons of past, ones that would guide me, remind me, and empower me to continue living authentically. New beginnings awaited, and I was ready to embrace them with open arms. My journey was far from over. It was only just beginning.